Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowed corridors of power where crowns cast long shadows and whispers carry more weight than proclamations. You're walking through gilded hallways where the most powerful women in history moved like ghosts, their influence rippling through kingdoms while remaining officially invisible. Tonight, you'll discover the Queen's consort who ruled from behind velvet curtains, their names often forgotten while their husbands claimed the glory. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down as you realize these women shaped the very world you inhabit today. Their decisions started wars, ended dynasties, and changed the course of human civilization. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for. Why certain battles were fought, why empires rose and fell, why the map of Europe looks the way it does today. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to tell me where and when you started watching this video, or perhaps share what draws you to these hidden stories of power. Your engagement helps these forgotten queens find their voices again. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval castle where candlelight flickers against stone walls, and you notice something peculiar. The king sits upon his throne, golden crown gleaming, but your eyes are drawn to the woman beside him. Her crown is smaller, her throne positioned slightly behind his, yet when petitioners approach, you see their eyes dart to her face, searching for the subtle nod or frown that will determine their fate. This is the world of the Queen's consort, where official powerlessness masked unofficial omnipotence. You watch as she leans forward, her silk gown rustling, to whisper something in the king's ear. Whatever she says causes him to straighten, his decision suddenly firm. The petitioner's fate has been sealed by words no chronicler will record. Throughout history, the role of queen consort has been one of fascinating contradiction. Officially, these women were expected to be decorative, fertile, and silent. They were meant to produce heirs and look beautiful at court ceremonies. Yet you discover that the most successful queen's consort understood that real power often flows through unofficial channels. While their husbands commanded armies and signed treaties, these women commanded something far more subtle and often more effective: influence. You observe how they built networks of loyalty that spiderwebbed across continents. Through carefully chosen ladies-in-waiting, strategic correspondence, and the ancient art of hospitality, they created invisible empires. A queen consort might never lead troops into battle, but she could ensure those troops were fed, funded, and fighting for the right cause. She might never sign a treaty, but she could arrange the marriages that made such treaties necessary. The medieval concept of queenship was deeply tied to the sacred. You feel the weight of religious ceremony as you witness a queen's coronation. She's not just becoming a political figure, she's being transformed into a semi-divine being, God's chosen vessel for producing the next generation of rulers. This spiritual authority gave Queen's consort a unique type of power. They were the holy mothers of kingdoms, and challenging them meant challenging the divine order itself. But you also noticed the precarious nature of their position. A queen consort's power was always borrowed, always dependent on her relationship with the king. Fall from his favour, fail to produce sons, or simply grow old and less attractive, and she could find herself discarded, divorced, or worse. Some found themselves accused of adultery, witchcraft, or treason when they became inconvenient. The very intimacy that gave them influence also made them vulnerable. The economics of queenship were complex and often hidden. You peek behind the official records to discover that many queens consort controlled vast resources. Their dowries, dower lands, and personal estates gave them independent wealth that could be deployed strategically. Some became patrons of arts and learning, creating cultural legacies that outlasted their husbands' military conquests. Others used their resources to fund religious institutions, building networks of gratitude and obligation that served their political purposes. You notice the subtle tools these women wielded with masterful precision. Fashion became a diplomatic language, the choice of which jewels to wear, which colours to favour, which foreign styles to adopt could send messages across kingdoms faster than any messenger. A queen's household appointments were never casual choices. Every lady-in-waiting, every chaplain, every musician was selected for their connections and loyalties. Through these carefully curated circles, information, food, and favours were exchanged. The art of letter writing became their primary weapon. You glimpse over their shoulders as they craft correspondence that appears to discuss family matters but actually coordinates political alliances. Their personal relationships, with daughters married into foreign courts, with sisters serving as abbesses, with cousins holding strategic positions, became diplomatic channels that operated parallel to official state communications. Historians still argue whether these women were truly powerful or merely pawns in a male-dominated system. Some scholars see them as early feminists, cleverly working within restrictive systems to achieve their goals. Others view them as collaborators who helped maintain patriarchal structures by making them appear more benevolent. The truth, you realize, is likely somewhere between these extremes, varying dramatically based on individual circumstances and cultural contexts. You notice how different cultures approach the role of queen consort in fascinating ways. In China, the Empress Dowager could become the effective ruler of the empire. Her authority derived from being the mother of the emperor. In the Ottoman Empire, the Queen Mother, or Valid Sultan, wielded enormous power within the palace system. European queens consort often found their influence channeled through religious patronage and diplomatic marriage arrangements. The bedroom, paradoxically, became both the source of their greatest vulnerability and their most potent power base. You understand that in an age where bloodlines determined legitimacy, the queen's fertility was literally the foundation of royal authority. Yet this same intimacy with the king gave them unparalleled access to his thoughts, fears, and decision-making processes. Late-night conversations between husband and wife shaped policies that affected millions. Religious devotion provided another avenue for influence that was both socially acceptable and politically powerful. You watch as queens consort founded convents, sponsored religious orders, and patronized holy men and women. These activities gave them moral authority while creating networks of loyal supporters throughout the kingdom. A queen's confessor often wielded more real influence than many court officials, serving as her advisor, and sometimes her spy. The phenomenon of regent queens reveals the ultimate paradox of their position. When kings died leaving minor heirs, the same society that normally denied women political authority would suddenly entrust entire kingdoms to their care. You witness these remarkable transformations as decorative consorts overnight became absolute rulers, often demonstrating political acumen that surpassed their deceased husbands. As you prepare to delve deeper into these hidden histories, you sense the whispers of women whose names have been overshadowed by their more famous husbands. Their stories are written between the lines of official chronicles, hidden in personal letters, and preserved in the grateful memories of those they helped. Tonight, you'll walk in their footsteps and discover how the most powerful queens in history were often those who never officially ruled at all. The crown they wore may have been smaller, but the kingdoms they influenced were vast beyond measure. You find yourself transported to the sun-drenched courts of 12th century Europe, where one woman's ambitions stretched across two kingdoms and reshaped the political landscape of medieval Europe. Eleanor of Aquitaine moves through these halls with the confidence of someone who knows she possesses something more valuable than gold, bloodline, beauty, and an intellect sharp enough to outmaneuver kings at 15. You watch Eleanor inherit the vast Duchy of Aquitaine, making her the most eligible heiress in Europe. Her lands stretch from the Loire Valley to the Pyrenees, encompassing territories larger than the Kingdom of France itself. You can almost taste the wine from her vineyards, smell the salt air from her Atlantic ports, and hear the troubadours whose courtly love songs she patronizes. This isn't just inheritance. It's a power base that will allow her to play the great game of medieval politics on equal terms with any monarch. You witness her first strategic marriage to Louis VII of France in 1137, a union that should have created the most powerful kingdom in Europe. But here's where Eleanor demonstrates the complexity of queenly power. Sometimes the very thing that makes you valuable also makes you dangerous. Her spirited personality clashes with Louis's pious, almost monkish nature. While he prays, she hunts. While he fasts, she feasts. While he contemplates the afterlife, she's busy shaping this one. The Second Crusade becomes Eleanor's stage for displaying her unconventional approach to queenly duties. You march alongside her as she leads her own contingent of Aquitanian knights to the Holy Land, scandalizing Europe by wearing armour and participating in military councils. Rumours swirl around her. Some whisper of an affair with her uncle Raymond of Antioch. Others suggest she's plotting to claim Jerusalem for herself. The truth, as you discover, is more nuanced, more politically astute than the gossips imagine. Eleanor understood something that many of her contemporaries missed. Information is power, and travel is education. During the Crusade, she builds relationships with Byzantine nobles, learns Arabic customs, and absorbs lessons about trade routes that will benefit her domains for decades. While other crusaders see only religious duty, Eleanor sees opportunity to expand her network of influence across the Mediterranean world. The annulment of her marriage to Louis VII in 1152 represents one of medieval history's most audacious political maneuvers. You watch as Eleanor manipulates canon law, claiming consanguinity, too close blood relation, to dissolve a marriage that has produced 2 daughters but no male heir. Within weeks of regaining her freedom and her lands, she's already negotiating her next move with the calculating precision of a chess master. Her marriage to Henry Plantagenet, who would become Henry II of England, creates an empire that stretches from Scotland to the Pyrenees. You can sense the electricity in the air as 2 of medieval Europe's most dynamic personalities join forces. This isn't just romance, it's a merger that will dominate European politics for generations. Together, they control more territory than the King of France, creating a power imbalance that will fuel conflicts for centuries. But Eleanor's true genius reveals itself in how she manages this vast inheritance while raising a brood of future kings and queens. You peek into her private chambers, where she's simultaneously nursing the future Richard the Lionheart, dictating letters to her administrators in Aquitaine, and planning the marriage alliances that will place her children on thrones across Europe. Her daughter Marie becomes Countess of Champagne, establishing a court that will become the centre of courtly love literature. Her daughter Eleanor becomes Queen of Castile. Her sons will fight over crowns from England to Jerusalem, The rebellion of 1173 showcases Eleanor at her most politically ruthless. You watch as she orchestrates a coordinated uprising against her own husband, allying with her sons and the King of France to challenge Henry's authority. This isn't mere family drama, it's a sophisticated attempt to redistribute power within the Plantagenet Empire. Eleanor understands that Henry's centralized control threatens the traditional autonomy of her Aquitanian domains, and she's prepared to risk everything to preserve her ancestral rights. Her capture and subsequent imprisonment by Henry reveals both the limits and the endurance of her power. For 16 years, you see Eleanor confined to various castles, officially powerless yet still maintaining correspondence with supporters across her domains. Even in captivity, she remains a political force. Henry dares not harm her because she's too valuable as a hostage and too dangerous as a martyr. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's rebellions were motivated by personal ambition, maternal devotion to her sons, or genuine political principle regarding feudal rights. The evidence suggests all three factors interplayed in complex ways, creating a political philosophy that was both pragmatic and idealistic. The moment of Eleanor's greatest triumph arrives with Henry's death in 1189. At 67, an age when most medieval women were considered past their useful lives, she emerges from prison to become regent for her absent son Richard. You watch in amazement as she travels across the Plantagenet domains, from England to Aquitaine, securing loyalty and organising the administration of a vast empire. Her energy seems inexhaustible, her political instincts sharper than ever. Her journey to Sicily to escort Richard's bride, Berengaria of Nuoro, to the Holy Land demonstrates Eleanor's understanding of medieval queenship's international dimensions. This isn't just grandmother helping with wedding arrangements, it's high-stakes diplomacy that will determine alliances across the Mediterranean. You sail with her through storms and political intrigue, watching as she negotiates safe passage, manages logistics for a royal wedding in a foreign land, and ensures the stability of kingdoms thousands of miles from home. When Richard is captured on his return from the Third Crusade, Eleanor's response reveals the full extent of her remaining influence. You witness her mobilizing resources across two kingdoms to raise his ransom, writing letters that blend motherly desperation with political calculation. Her appeals to the Pope, to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, and to nobles across Europe demonstrate a network of relationships built over 5 decades of strategic relationship building. The final phase of Eleanor's life, during the reign of her younger son John, shows a master politician adapting to changed circumstances. Though officially retired to the Abbey of Fontevraud, she continues to intervene in crises, emerging to defend Anjou against French attacks when she's nearly 80 years old. Her last great political act involves securing the succession of her grandson Arthur of Brittany, demonstrating that even approaching death, she remains focused on dynastic continuity. Eleanor's legacy extends far beyond her own remarkable life. You trace how her patronage of troubadour culture fundamentally changed European literature and social customs. The concept of courtly love, which she helped nurture in her courts, introduced ideas about romantic relationships that still influence Western culture today. Her example of female political participation, though controversial in her own time, provided a template for future queens who would claim similar authority. You realise that Eleanor of Aquitaine represents the medieval queen consort at her most successful, someone who transformed the limitations of her official role into opportunities for unprecedented influence. Her web of political relationships, spanning generations and crossing cultural boundaries, demonstrates how a determined and intelligent woman could reshape the medieval world through strategic thinking, careful relationship management, and the courage to risk everything for power. You step through the marble corridors of Constantinople, where the scent of incense mingles with intrigue, and discover a world where an actress from the Hippodrome rose to become one of history's most powerful empresses. The Byzantine Empire spreads before you like a jewelled tapestry, and at its centre sits Theodora, whose journey from the entertainment districts to the imperial throne represents one of the most dramatic transformations in political history. The Constantinople you enter pulses with energy from a dozen different cultures. Greek fire burns in the harbour, silk merchants haggle in a dozen languages, and the great dome of Hagia Sophia dominates a skyline that bridges Europe and Asia. This is the Eastern Roman Empire at its zenith, where Roman law meets Oriental splendour, and where a woman's wit can elevate her higher than noble birth ever could. You glimpse Theodora in her earliest incarnation, performing in the Hippodrome's theatrical productions that blur the line between entertainment and scandal. Byzantine theatre was notorious for its bawdy humour and sexual content, and actresses occupied a social position barely above prostitutes. Yet even in these humble circumstances, you notice something extraordinary about this young woman, an intelligence that sparkles in her eyes, a presence that commands attention even in a crowd of performers. The transformation begins when Theodora catches the eye of Justinian, nephew and heir apparent to Emperor Justin I. You watch as their unlikely romance unfolds against the backdrop of Byzantine court politics, where social mobility was theoretically possible but practically rare. Justinian's infatuation with an actress scandalizes the aristocracy, but you sense that his attraction goes beyond mere physical desire. He recognizes in Theodora a political mind that matches his own ambitions. The legal obstacles to their marriage reveal the rigid class distinctions of Byzantine society. Ancient Roman law explicitly forbade senators from marrying actresses, and Justinian's status as future emperor makes such a union politically explosive. You witness the careful manoeuvring required to overcome these barriers, including changes to imperial law that officially elevated Theodora's social status. This wasn't just romance overcoming social convention, it was a calculated political alliance disguised as a love story. Between their first meeting and their eventual marriage, you observe Theodora's careful cultivation of her public image. She abandons the theatrical life, embraces Christian piety with conspicuous devotion, and begins associating with the respectable women of the court. This transformation wasn't mere performance. She was systematically rebuilding her reputation while learning the intricate protocols of imperial society. You watch her study court etiquette with the same intensity she once devoted to memorizing theatrical scripts. When Justinian becomes emperor in 527, you see Theodora transformed into Augusta, a title that made her co-ruler rather than mere consort. Byzantine empresses traditionally wielded significant influence, but Theodora's power exceeds even these generous precedents. Contemporary sources describe her receiving foreign ambassadors independently, issuing her own edicts, and making policy decisions that shape the empire's direction. Her throne sits beside Justinian's as an equal, not subordinate, and courtiers quickly learn that disrespecting the empress means risking imperial wrath. The Nika riots of 532 provide the defining moment of Theodora's reign. When you witness her political courage in its most dramatic form, Constantinople erupts in violence as rival circus factions unite against Justinian's rule, setting fire to the city and proclaiming a new emperor. With flames visible from the palace windows and advisors urging flight, you watch Theodora deliver the speech that saves the empire. Purple makes a fine shroud. Her declaration that she would rather die as an empress than live as a fugitive stiffens Justinian's resolve and leads to the brutal suppression of the rebellion. You discover that Theodora's influence extended far beyond ceremonial functions into the detailed governance of the empire. She maintained her own intelligence network, operated independent diplomatic channels, and pursued policy goals that sometimes conflicted with her husband's preferences. Religious policy became a particular arena where her influence manifested, as she protected monophysite Christians despite Justinian's attempts at religious unity through orthodox doctrine. The Empress's concern for women's welfare reveals another dimension of her political philosophy. You observe as she sponsors legislation that improves the legal status of women, outlaws forced prostitution, and provides economic support for reformed prostitutes. These weren't merely charitable gestures, but systematic attempts to address social problems through imperial legislation. Her own background gave her insights into the vulnerabilities of women in Byzantine society that aristocratic empresses might never have understood. Her establishment of the metanoia, a residence for former prostitutes, demonstrates how personal experience translated into institutional reform. You visit this sanctuary where hundreds of women found refuge, education, and opportunities for respectable livelihoods. The facility included workshops for textile production, schools for basic literacy, and chapels for spiritual guidance. Some critics whispered that Theodora was merely salving her conscience. But you witness the genuine transformation in these women's lives. Theodora's court becomes a centre of intellectual and artistic activity that rivals the greatest cultural achievements of the ancient world. You walk through halls where legal scholars compile the Corpus Juris Civilis, architects plan the reconstruction of Hagia Sophia, and historians like Procopius record the empire's achievements for posterity. Yet you also sense the undercurrents of tension. Procopius's secret history reveals the fear and resentment that Theodora's power inspired among traditional elites. The Empress's diplomatic activities demonstrate her understanding of Byzantine geopolitics complexity. You watch her maintain correspondence with Ostrogothic Queen Amalasuntha, negotiate with Persian ambassadors, and manage relationships with various barbarian chieftains along the empire's extensive frontiers. Her gender sometimes became an asset in these negotiations, as foreign rulers might underestimate her political acumen while appreciating the honour of corresponding directly with the Empress. You observe Theodora's mastery of Byzantine court intrigue, where she manages competing factions with the skill of a chess grandmaster. The blue and green circus factions that had united against Justinian during the Nika riots required careful management afterward. Rather than simply crushing both groups, Theodora plays them against each other, granting favours to one side while maintaining relationships with the other, ensuring that neither becomes powerful enough to threaten imperial authority again. Historians still argue whether Theodora's influence was ultimately beneficial or detrimental to the Byzantine Empire. Supporters point to her role in saving Justinian's throne during the Nika riots, her progressive social legislation, and her contribution to the cultural flowering of the early 6th century. Critics argue that her vindictive nature, her religious partisanship, and her interference in imperial administration weakened the empire's governance. You notice how Theodora's background as an actress served her well in the theatrical world of Byzantine court politics. The skills she learned performing, reading audiences, projecting authority, controlling her emotional expressions, translated perfectly into the imperial role. Byzantine court ceremony was itself a form of theatre. designed to awe subjects and foreign visitors with displays of imperial majesty. The religious controversies of her reign reveal the complex relationship between personal faith and political calculation, while officially supporting Justinian's efforts to unify Christian doctrine. Theodora secretly protected Monophysite clergy and maintained connections with theologians who opposed imperial religious policy. You see her navigating between public conformity and private conviction, using her position to moderate her husband's sometimes harsh religious policies. Theodora's influence on architectural projects extends beyond mere patronage to active involvement in design and construction decisions. You witness her participation in planning the rebuilt Hagia Sophia, her establishment of churches dedicated to saints particularly important to women, and her creation of residential complexes that provided housing for reformed prostitutes. These projects represented both personal devotion and political statements about the role of imperial power in improving subjects' lives. The Empress's death in 548 marks the end of an era in Byzantine politics. You observe how Justinian's later years lack the decisive quality that characterized his early reign, suggesting that Theodora's political judgment had been more crucial to their partnership than contemporary sources acknowledged. The legislation she championed gradually eroded after her death, indicating that her personal influence had been necessary to maintain progressive policies. You realize that Theodora represents the ultimate transformation of the queen consort role, someone who transcended the traditional limitations of gender and birth to become a true partner in imperial governance. Her story demonstrates how intelligence, determination, and political skill could overcome seemingly insurmountable social barriers in the right historical circumstances. From the entertainment districts of Constantinople to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, her journey reveals the potential for individual agency even within the constraints of ancient social system. You find yourself in the perfumed chambers of the Louvre Palace, where candlelight flickers across parchment covered in elegant script, and witness Catherine de' Medici weaving the threads of European politics through her vast correspondence network. The scent of melted sealing wax fills the air as you watch one of history's most skilled political manipulators orchestrate the fate of nations from behind an ornate writing desk. Catherine's fingers move with practiced precision as she crafts letters that appear to discuss family matters but actually coordinate military campaigns, religious policies, and dynastic marriages across the continent. You lean closer to observe her technique, how she layers meaning within seemingly innocent phrases, how she adjusts her tone for different recipients, how she manages to sound simultaneously motherly and menacing depending on her audience's needs. The young woman who arrived in France as a 14-year-old bride brought more than just Medici gold to her marriage with the future Henry II. You trace her journey from awkward foreign princess to master of French court intrigue, watching as she learns to navigate the complex web of noble families, religious factions, and regional loyalties that define 16th century France. Her early years of apparent powerlessness were actually an intensive education in the art of influence. You witness Catherine's transformation during her husband's reign, as she evolves from decorative consort to essential advisor. While Henry pursues his famous affair with Diane de Poitiers, Catherine channels her energies into understanding the machinery of government. She attends council meetings as an observer, memorizes the names and relationships of every significant noble family, and begins building the information network that will serve her for decades. The fatal jousting accident that kills Henry VIII in 1559 thrusts Catherine into the role she was born to play, regent for her minor son Francis II. You feel the sudden shift in court dynamics as nobles who had dismissed her as the Italian merchant's daughter suddenly discover that she holds the keys to royal favour. Her calm assumption of authority reveals years of careful preparation that few had noticed. Catherine's correspondence during the early Regency demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of power's psychology. You read over her shoulder as she writes to Philip II of Spain, her language carefully balancing respect with subtle threats. To the Duke of Guise, she offers support while gently reminding him of his dependence on royal favour. To her own family in Italy, she maintains connections while avoiding commitments that might compromise French interests. The death of Francis II after barely a year on the throne brings Catherine's greatest challenge and opportunity. Her second son, Charles IX, is only 10 years old, ensuring another lengthy regency. You watch as Catherine consolidates her position against competing claims for influence, particularly from the powerful Guise family and the Protestant nobility led by the Prince of Condé. Her strategy combines public displays of maternal devotion with private negotiations that secure crucial loyalties. The outbreak of the French Wars of Religion transforms Catherine from regent to battlefield commander of sorts, though she fights with letters rather than swords. You observe her attempts to balance Catholic and Protestant factions, sometimes supporting one side, sometimes the other, always working to preserve royal authority against the forces threatening to tear France apart. Her famous tolerance edicts represent not religious enlightenment but political calculation. She needs both factions weak enough to remain dependent on royal mediation. You discover that Catherine's intelligence network rivals those of any contemporary ruler. Through her ladies-in-waiting, her confessors, her physicians, and her astrologers, she gathers information from across Europe. Her correspondence reveals knowledge of English court politics, Spanish military preparations, and Ottoman diplomatic initiatives. This information becomes currency in her negotiations, allowing her to offer valuable intelligence in exchange for political support. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572 represents Catherine's most controversial and complex political decision. You witness the agonizing calculations that led to her approval of the systematic killing of Protestant leaders gathered in Paris for her daughter's wedding. While historians debate whether she planned the massacre or merely failed to prevent it, her letters reveal a woman desperately trying to prevent civil war by eliminating its potential leadership. The irony that the massacre actually intensified religious conflict demonstrates the limitations of even the most sophisticated political manipulation. Catherine's management of her children's marriages showcases her understanding of dynastic politics' international dimensions. You observe her negotiations for her daughter Elizabeth's marriage to Philip II of Spain, balancing French interests against the need for Spanish alliance. Her daughter Margot's marriage to Henry of Navarre, the future Henry IV, represents an attempt to heal religious divisions through matrimonial diplomacy. Each wedding becomes a political statement carefully calculated for maximum strategic advantage. The famous Grand Tour that Catherine organises for the Charles IX reveals her understanding of monarchy's theatrical dimensions. You travel with the royal court as it progresses through France's provinces, watching Catherine orchestrate elaborate ceremonies designed to display royal magnificence while gathering intelligence about local conditions. Each stop becomes an opportunity for informal negotiations with regional leaders, religious authorities, and foreign ambassadors. Historians still argue whether Catherine's religious policies represented genuine tolerance or cynical manipulation. Her correspondence suggests a woman more concerned with political stability than theological correctness, willing to support either Catholic or Protestant causes when they served royal interests. This pragmatic approach to religious questions horrified contemporaries, who expected rulers to champion divine truth rather than political expedience. You notice how Catherine adapts traditional queenly roles to serve her political purposes. Her patronage of arts and letters creates a cultural court that rivals Italy's Renaissance centres, but also serves as a diplomatic tool for impressing foreign visitors and rewarding loyal supporters. Her famous interest in astrology and occult practices, while genuine, also provides useful camouflage for intelligence gathering and political planning that might otherwise appear threatening. The regency for her third son, Henry III, demonstrates Catherine's evolution into a senior stateswoman whose advice carries weight even when she no longer holds official power. You observe her continued involvement in crucial decisions, her management of court factions, and her attempts to guide Henry through the increasingly complex challenges facing the French monarchy. Her influence endures not through formal authority, but through the relationships and obligations built over decades of careful political cultivation. Catherine's correspondence with foreign rulers reveals her sophisticated understanding of European balance of power politics. She maintains relationships with Elizabeth I of England, despite their religious differences, corresponds with Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II about French interests in Germany, and even exchanges letters with Ottoman Sultan Murad III about potential cooperation against Spanish power. These communications demonstrate how a Queen Mother could operate as an independent diplomatic force. The later years of Catherine's life show her struggling to maintain influence as France slides toward the chaos that will eventually produce Henry IV's succession. You witness her final attempts to mediate between competing factions, her efforts to preserve Valois dynastic claims, and her growing frustration with the religious fanaticism that makes political compromise increasingly difficult. You realise that Catherine de' Medici represents the Queen Consort as master diplomat, someone who transformed the traditional limitations of female authority into opportunities for unprecedented international influence. Her legacy lies not in military conquests or religious reforms, but in the sophisticated political techniques she developed for managing complex multi-party conflicts through careful relationship building, strategic information gathering, and the patient cultivation of obligations and dependencies that transcended formal governmental structures. You find yourself gliding through the Forbidden City's hushed corridors, where silk rustles against lacquered floors and the scent of jasmine mingles with political intrigue. Behind ornate screens decorated with golden dragons, you discover Empress Dowager Cixi, the woman who would rule China for nearly half a century while officially remaining invisible. Her delicate hands manipulate jade pieces on a game board. But you realize the game she's playing spans continents, and the pieces are human lives. The young woman who entered the imperial palace as a low-ranking concubine possessed an intelligence that burned like incense in the shadows. You watch 17-year-old Cixi navigate the treacherous politics of Emperor Xianfeng's court, where a single misstep could mean death and only the most cunning survived. Her beauty caught the emperor's attention, but her wit ensured she remained memorable long after other concubines were forgotten. The birth of her son Tongzai in 1856 transforms Cixi from disposable ornament to indispensable political player. You feel the shift in palace dynamics as she becomes the mother of the heir apparent, her status suddenly protected by the most sacred obligation in Chinese culture, ensuring dynastic continuity. Yet even in this elevated position, she remains officially powerless, forbidden by Confucian tradition from participating directly in governance. You observe how Cixi turns the restrictions of the Chinese court system into advantages through patient manipulation. The elaborate protocols that keep imperial women separated from male officials become her shield against direct accountability. When controversial decisions emerge from behind the silk screens, critics cannot be certain whether they originated with the Empress Dowager, her co-regent, or the young emperor himself. This ambiguity becomes her greatest weapon. The death of Emperor Xianfeng in 1861 precipitates the crisis that will define Cixi's reign. You witness the tense negotiations over the regency arrangement for 5-year-old Tongji as powerful court factions maneuver for control. Cixi's alliance with Empress Gen creates an unexpected coalition that outmaneuvers the male regents appointed by the dying emperor. Their coup, accomplished through forged documents and strategic bribery, demonstrates that female exclusion from official power doesn't necessarily mean exclusion from real power. The establishment of the dual regency reveals Cixi's sophisticated understanding of Chinese political psychology. By sharing official authority with the senior empress, she avoids the appearance of personal ambition while maintaining practical control over day-to-day decisions. You watch as she gradually assumes dominance within this partnership, her stronger personality and superior political instincts making her the effective ruler while Empress Gen provides legitimacy and ceremonial dignity. You discover that Cixi's intelligence network extends throughout the empire like spider webs glistening with morning dew. Through eunuchs, palace servants, provincial wives, and merchant connections, information flows to her apartments from across China's vast territories. She knows about rebellions before her generals, understands economic conditions better than her ministers, and maintains awareness of foreign activities that sometimes exceeds her diplomats' knowledge. The Taiping Rebellion's final phase demonstrates Cixi's pragmatic approach to imperial governance. You observe her support for General Zheng Guofen's ruthless suppression of the rebels, recognizing that ideological purity matters less than dynastic survival. Her willingness to employ Han Chinese generals despite Manchu traditions of ethnic exclusivity reveals a political flexibility that will characterize her entire reign. The challenge of Western imperialism forces Cixi to confront the fundamental question of China's relationship with modernity. You witness her internal struggles as she balances traditional Confucian values against the obvious need for military and technological modernization. Her support for the self-strengthening movement represents a calculated compromise, adopting Western techniques while preserving Chinese cultural foundations. The mysterious death of Emperor Tongji in 1875 provides another opportunity for Cixi to demonstrate her political mastery. Rather than allowing power to pass to Tongji's infant heir, she maneuvers to place her nephew Guangxu on the throne, ensuring another lengthy regency under her control. You watch as she navigates the complex succession protocols, using her knowledge of imperial genealogy and her network of palace supporters to secure this irregular but legal arrangement. Cixi's retirement during Guangxu's majority proves to be another masterpiece of political theatre. You observe how she withdraws from daily governance while maintaining ultimate authority over crucial decisions. Her residence at the Summer Palace becomes an alternative court where the real business of empire continues under the guise of maternal guidance and ceremonial consultation. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894-95 represents perhaps Cixi's greatest political failure. When her confidence in traditional Chinese military superiority collides with modern Japanese efficiency, you witness her shock at China's humiliating defeat, her rage at the terms of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, and her dawning recognition that China's isolation from world affairs has become unsustainable. The war's aftermath forces her to reconsider fundamental assumptions about governance and modernization. Emperor Guangxu's 100 Days Reform in 1898 creates the final showdown between traditional and modern approaches to Chinese governance. You watch as Cixi initially tolerates her nephew's radical reform program, before concluding that his changes threaten the stability of imperial authority. Her coup against Guangxu demonstrates that even modernizing reforms must respect traditional power structures to survive in late Qing China. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900 showcases both Cixi's political miscalculation and her remarkable ability to recover from disaster. You witness her initial support for the anti-foreign movement, her flight from Beijing when the intervention forces arrive, and her shrewd negotiation of terms that preserve the dynasty despite military defeat. Her survival of this crisis demonstrates the resilience that kept her in power through 5 decades of continuous upheaval. Historians still argue whether Cixi's resistance to reform ultimately doomed the Qing dynasty or prolonged its survival against impossible odds. Her supporters point to her success in maintaining Chinese independence during the height of Western imperialism, while critics argue that her conservatism prevented the modernization that might have saved imperial China. You notice how Cixi adapts traditional Chinese concepts of maternal authority to justify unprecedented female political power. Her role as sacred mother of the empire provides cultural legitimacy for activities that would otherwise violate Confucian gender norms. This rhetorical strategy allows her to exercise authority while maintaining the appearance of traditional propriety. The Empress Dowager's patronage of arts and architecture reveals another dimension of her political strategy. You tour the reconstructed summer palace, observing how its magnificence serves both personal pleasure and political purpose. The palace demonstrates imperial resources to foreign visitors while providing a setting where Cixi can receive diplomats and conduct negotiations outside the formal constraints of Forbidden City protocol. The final years of Cixi's reign show an elderly woman grappling with forces beyond any individual's control. You observe her belated attempts at constitutional reform, her efforts to modernize the imperial military, and her recognition that China must adapt to survive in the 20th century. Her death in 1908, occurring suspiciously close to Emperor Guangxu's demise, ends an era in Chinese history while leaving fundamental questions about China's future unresolved. You realize that Empress Dowager Cixi represents the ultimate expression of hidden queenly power, someone who ruled one of the world's largest empires for nearly 50 years while maintaining the fiction that women could not participate in governance. Her story demonstrates how cultural restrictions on female authority could be circumvented by those clever enough to work within traditional systems while gradually reshaping them to serve new purposes. You step into the throne room of Castile, where morning light streams through stained glass windows depicting saints and battles, illuminating a queen whose pious exterior conceals one of history's most ruthless political minds. Isabella. Faye sits reviewing documents with the careful attention of an accountant, but you realize she's calculating more than royal revenues. She's measuring the price of empire, the cost of religious purity, and the value of exploration that will reshape the known world. The scent of orange blossoms drifts through the palace corridors, but underneath lies something darker. The smoke of burning books, the metallic tang of fear, and the incense that fails to mask the proceedings of the Spanish Inquisition. You watch Isabella's face as she steams documents that will fund Christopher Columbus, while simultaneously authorizing the persecution of conversos and Muslims. Her expression reveals nothing of the internal calculations that balance exploration against expulsion, discovery against destruction. Isabella's path to power began with a civil war that demonstrated her understanding of medieval politics' brutal realities. You witness her struggle against her half-brother Henry IV's attempts to disinherit her in favour of his alleged daughter Juana. The legitimacy crisis that plagued Castile for years taught Isabella that power belongs to those strong enough to seize it and clever enough to justify their actions afterward. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon wasn't just romance. It was a strategic alliance that doubled her military resources and created the foundation for Spanish unification. The partnership between Isabella and Ferdinand reveals two complementary approaches to royal authority. While Ferdinand focuses on military campaigns and territorial expansion, you observe Isabella managing the complex internal politics of religious unification and administrative reform. Their famous motto, tanto monta, "they amount to the same," suggests equality, but you notice how they divide responsibilities according to their individual strengths, rather than traditional gender roles. You discover that Isabella's support for Columbus represents far more than curiosity about geographical exploration. Her careful review of his proposals reveals a monarch calculating the potential returns on investment with merchant-like precision. The terms she negotiates give Columbus significant rewards for success, while limiting royal financial exposure if his venture fails. Her willingness to pledge her personal jewellery demonstrates confidence in the enterprise, but also a shrewd understanding of the symbolic value such gestures carry. The fall of Granada in 1492 provides the backdrop for Isabella's most controversial decisions. As you witness the euphoria of Christian reconquest mixing with the practical challenges of governing a newly diverse population. Her initial promises of religious tolerance for Muslims seem genuine, but you observe how quickly practical considerations override idealistic intentions. The forced conversions that follow reveal a queen more concerned with political unity than spiritual authenticity. The establishment of the Spanish Inquisition showcases Isabella's ability to transform religious authority into political power. You watch as she negotiates with Pope Sixtus IV for the right to appoint inquisitors, effectively bringing this powerful institution under royal control rather than papal authority. The Inquisition's procedures, confiscation of property, secret accusations, and public punishment create a system of terror that serves political consolidation as much as religious purification. Your attention turns to Isabella's revolutionary approach to royal finance, as she implements taxation and administrative reforms that transform the medieval Castile into a modern state. Her restructuring of royal revenues, her regulation of municipal governments, and her standardization of legal procedures demonstrate an understanding of governance that anticipates later developments in state building. The wealth flowing from the Americas will soon vindicate her investment in exploration, but her domestic reforms ensure that this treasure can be effectively utilized. The expulsion of the Jews in 1492 represents perhaps Isabella's most calculated act of political cruelty. You witness her deliberations over this decision, observing how economic considerations, the seizure of Jewish property, and the elimination of money-lending competition combine with religious ideology and popular pressure to produce a policy that devastates thousands while enriching the crown. Her ability to present this expulsion as religious necessity while reaping its financial benefits demonstrates the seamless integration of piety and pragmatism that characterizes her reign. Isabella's management of the nobility reveals sophisticated understanding of aristocratic psychology and medieval power structures. Rather than attempting to crush noble power directly, you observe her strategy of redirecting aristocratic energies toward foreign conquest and religious campaigns. The conquest of Granada, the exploration of the Americas, and the later Italian wars provide outlets for noble ambition while serving royal interests. Her granting of encomiendas in the New World creates new opportunities for aristocratic advancement under royal supervision. The Queen's involvement in her children's marriages demonstrates the international scope of her political vision. You witness her negotiations for Catherine of Aragon's marriage to Arthur, Prince of Wales, recognising that this alliance could isolate France and secure English support for Spanish interests. Her daughter Juana's marriage to Philip of Burgundy promises to bring the Low Countries into Spanish orbit, while her son Juan's marriage to Archduchess Margaret strengthens ties with the Habsburg dynasty. You discover that Isabella's court becomes a centre of Renaissance learning that rivals Italian cultural achievements. Her patronage of scholars, her establishment of educational institutions, and her support for printing technology demonstrate understanding that cultural prestige enhances political authority. The Spanish language's standardization during her reign, the translation of classical works, and the development of historiographical traditions create intellectual foundations for Spanish imperial expansion. The tragic deaths of her children reveal Isabella's personal vulnerability beneath her public strength. You observe her grief at Prince Juan's death, her anguish over Juana's mental instability, and her concern about the succession crisis these losses create. Her decision to name Juana as heir, despite obvious incapacity, demonstrates the limitations of even absolute monarchs when confronted with the unpredictability of human nature and the demands of dynastic continuity. Historians still argue whether Isabella's religious policies represented genuine spiritual conviction or cynical political manipulation. Contemporary evidence suggests both motivations interplayed in complex ways, with Isabella apparently believing that religious unity was essential for political stability while also recognizing the material benefits that religious persecution could provide. You notice how Isabella's gender both constrains and enables her political activities. Traditional expectations of queenly piety provide cover for religious policies that might seem excessively harsh coming from a male ruler, while her maternal role legitimizes her concern for subjects' spiritual welfare. Yet her exclusion from military leadership forces her to rely on subordinates whose loyalty must be constantly maintained through careful management of rewards and punishments. The later years of Isabella's reign show a monarch grappling with the unexpected consequences of her earlier successes. The wealth flowing from American exploration creates inflation and economic disruption within Castile, while the religious uniformity achieved through expulsion and conversion generates ongoing security concerns about crypto-Jews and crypto-Muslims. Her efforts to regulate colonial administration reveal growing awareness that distant territories required different governmental approaches than European domains. Isabella's death in 1504 marks the end of an era in Spanish history, as you witness the immediate succession crisis that follows her demise. Her testament reveals a complex personality combining genuine religious devotion with hard-headed political calculation. Her provisions for the treatment of American Indians suggest belated concern about colonial abuses, while her arrangements for government during Juana's incapacity demonstrate continued focus on dynastic stability. You realize that Isabella of Castile represents the queen consort as nation builder, someone who used traditional religious authority to accomplish unprecedented political transformation. Her legacy includes the unification of Spain, the beginning of American colonization, and the establishment of religious uniformity that would define Spanish culture for centuries. Yet this legacy also encompasses the destruction of religious diversity, the expulsion of productive populations, and the establishment of colonial systems whose effects continue to shape global relationships today. You enter the shadowed galleries of Whitehall Palace, where tapestries depicting biblical scenes hang like protective talismans, and to discover Catherine Parr moving through halls that have witnessed the destruction of 5 queens before her. The 6th and final wife of Henry VIII glides past portraits of her predecessors with studied composure, but you sense the steel beneath her silk gown as she navigates the most dangerous court in Europe with the precision of a diplomat and the courage of a martyr. The woman who would become England's most influential queen consort arrives at court already twice widowed, her experience with difficult husbands serving as unexpected preparation for marriage to the most unpredictable monarch in Christendom. You observe 30-year-old Catherine's careful courtship dance with the aging Henry, noting how she balances intellectual stimulation with maternal comfort, offering the king both scholarly companion and nursemaid as his health deteriorates and his paranoia intensifies. Catherine's acceptance of Henry's marriage proposal in 1543 represents one of history's most calculated personal risks. You witness her private deliberations, weighing the almost certain dangers of royal marriage against the unprecedented opportunities for religious and educational reform. Her previous relationships with Protestant reformers like Thomas Seymour have convinced her that proximity to royal power offers the only hope for advancing the religious changes she believes essential for England's spiritual salvation. The royal wedding ceremony in July 1543 takes place in a palace still haunted by recent executions, and you feel the weight of precedent as Catherine becomes the first English queen to marry a king who has already beheaded 2 wives. Her wedding gown, though magnificent, seems almost like armour as she prepares to enter a role that has proven fatal for 1/3 of its recent occupants. Yet her calm demeanour suggests a woman who has made peace with the dangers she faces. You discover that Catherine's influence begins immediately through her transformation of the royal household into a centre of Renaissance learning and Protestant scholarship. Her appointment of Protestant tutors for the royal children, her patronage of religious reformers, and her establishment of regular theological discussions demonstrate how a queen consort could advance controversial religious policies through educational and cultural activities that appeared innocuous to conservative observers. The publication of Catherine's Prayers or Meditations in 1545 marks a revolutionary moment in English royal history, the first book published by a reigning English queen. You read over her shoulder as she crafts prose that appears to support traditional Catholic devotion while subtly advancing Protestant theological positions. Her careful language allows readers to interpret her meaning according to their own religious inclinations while gradually shifting the discourse toward Reformed Christianity. Catherine's relationship with the royal children reveals her understanding of how personal influence can shape political futures. You observe her careful cultivation of relationships with Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, noting how she adapts her approach to each child's personality and religious inclinations. Her insistence on providing Elizabeth with classical education equal to any prince's demonstrates progressive views about female intellectual capacity that will prove crucial for England's future. The conservative reaction against Catherine's religious activities creates the greatest crisis of her queenship, as you witness Stephen Gardiner and his allies manoeuvring to destroy her through charges of heresy. The discovery of Protestant books in her chambers, her protection of suspected religious radicals, and her theological debates with Henry himself provide ammunition for enemies who recognize that eliminating the Queen represents their best chance of halting religious reform. You feel the tension mounting as articles of impeachment are drawn up against Catherine, accusing her of violating the Act of 6 articles through her Protestant sympathies and her unauthorized theological discussions. The precedent of Catherine Howard's execution for adultery and Anne Boleyn's destruction on charges of treason demonstrates that Henry requires little legal justification for disposing of unwanted wives when political circumstances demand their removal. Catherine's salvation comes through her masterful manipulation of Henry's psychology during their final confrontation. You witness her carefully crafted submission, As she prostrates herself before the king while cleverly reframing her theological interests as feminine intellectual curiosity rather than dangerous religious innovation. Her declaration that she only discussed theology to distract Henry from his physical pain transforms potential treason into wifely devotion, appealing to the king's vanity while providing him with face-saving justification for reversing his decision. The dramatic scene where Henry's guards arrive to arrest Catherine only to find the royal couple reconciled demonstrates the Queen's perfect timing and psychological insight. You observe Henry's rage at his own counsellors for attempting to destroy a wife he has decided to keep, noting how Catherine's survival depends not on justice or innocence, but on her ability to read and manipulate the king's mercurial temperament. During Henry's final illness, Catherine effectively becomes regent in all but name, managing royal correspondence, receiving foreign ambassadors, and coordinating government business while the king remains largely bedridden. You watch as she exercises unprecedented authority for an English queen consort, her influence extending far beyond traditional ceremonial functions into the practical governance of the realm. The king's death in January 1547 transforms Catherine from endangered wife to powerful dowager queen, but also exposes her to new dangers as religious and political factions compete for control of the young Edward VI's regency. Her rapid remarriage to Thomas Seymour represents both personal happiness and political miscalculation, as you observe how her romantic desires conflict with the careful political positioning that had ensured her survival during Henry's reign. Historians still argue whether Catherine's Protestant sympathies represented genuine religious conviction or political calculation designed to align herself with the rising reformist faction at court. Her theological writing suggests sincere faith, but her careful navigation of religious controversies demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how religious positions could serve political purposes. You notice how Catherine's educational reforms extend beyond the royal family to influence broader English society. Her patronage of translators, her support for vernacular religious texts, and her encouragement of female learning help create the intellectual foundation for the Protestant Reformation's success in England. Her example of a learned queen participating in theological discourse legitimizes similar activities among aristocratic women throughout the realm. Catherine's relationship with Parliament reveals another dimension of her political influence. As you observe her lobbying efforts for religious legislation and her coordination with Protestant members to advance reform measures, her gender prevents direct participation in parliamentary proceedings, but her behind-the-scenes influence helps shape the legislative agenda during the final years of Henry's reign. The publication of Catherine's Lamentation of a Sinner in 1547 provides insight into her theological development and political strategy. You analyse her careful critique of Catholic practices, noting how she condemns religious errors she claims to have previously embraced, while avoiding direct attacks on individuals who might seek revenge. Her public confession of past spiritual blindness provides cover for more controversial Protestant positions, while demonstrating the intellectual humility expected of women in theological discourse. Catherine's death in childbirth in 1548 ends a brief but influential career that demonstrates how an intelligent and determined queen consort could advance controversial religious and educational reforms within the constraints of Tudor political culture. Her survival of Henry VIII's increasingly paranoid final years, her protection of Protestant reformers during periods of persecution, and her advancement of female education represent achievements that transcend her relatively short time as queen. You realise that Catherine Parr represents the queen consort as religious reformer, someone who used traditional feminine roles, wife, mother, patron to advance radical changes in English religious and intellectual life, her story demonstrates how apparent submission could mask real influence, how scholarly interests could serve political purposes, and how survival in a dangerous court required perfect timing, psychological insight, and the courage to risk everything for principles that transcended personal safety. You step into the gilded corridors of Versailles, where the scent of powder and perfume mingles with whispered conspiracies, and discover a young German princess plotting the overthrow of her own husband, while masquerading as a dutiful wife. Catherine II moves through these opulent halls with the grace of a dancer, but you sense the predator beneath the silken jewels as she calculates each smile, each curtsy, each carefully timed appearance that will eventually place the crown of all the Russias upon her foreign head. The transformation begins in the modest chambers of Anhalt-Zerbst, where you observe 15-year-old Sophie Friederike August studying Russian language and Orthodox theology with the intensity of a spy preparing for deep cover. Her mother's political ambitions and Frederick the Great's manoeuvring have arranged her betrothal to the heir of the Russian throne, but you witness Sophie's recognition that survival in the Russian court will require complete reinvention of her identity and purpose. The journey to St. Tom Petersburg reveals the scope of Sophie's challenge, as you travel alongside her through landscapes that stretch beyond imagination toward a court where German efficiency meets Slavic passion in often explosive combinations. Her conversion to Russian Orthodoxy and adoption of the name Catherine represents more than religious formality. It's the first step in a methodical campaign to become more Russian than the Russians themselves. You observe Catherine's early years at the court of Empress Elizabeth, noting how she navigates between competing factions while maintaining the appearance of innocuous foreign princess. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter in 1745 joins two of the most mismatched personalities in royal history, and you witness how their incompatibility becomes Catherine's opportunity to study Russian politics without the distractions of romantic happiness or domestic harmony. The peculiarities of Catherine's marriage provide both protection and strategic advantage, as you discover that Peter's obvious unfitness for a rule creates a constituency of nobles, officials, and military officers seeking alternative leadership. Catherine's careful cultivation of these relationships, disguised as social friendliness and intellectual curiosity, builds the network that will eventually support her coup against her own husband. Catherine's intellectual development during these years transforms her from provincial German princess into Enlightenment philosopher queen. You observe her correspondence with Voltaire, her study of Montesquieu's political theories, and her engagement with the ideas that are reshaping European thought. Yet you also notice how she adapts these Western concepts to Russian realities, recognizing that philosophical principles must be modified to serve practical political purposes. The birth of her son Paul in 1754 provides Catherine with both vulnerability and legitimacy, as you witness Empress Elizabeth's immediate seizure of the infant to ensure proper Russian upbringing. This separation creates pain but also opportunity, freeing Catherine from maternal obligations while establishing her status as mother of the future heir. Her subsequent relationships with Gregory Orlov and other favourites demonstrate how she balances personal needs with political calculations. You discover that Catherine's preparation for power extends far beyond court intrigue into serious study of governmental administration, military organisation, and economic theory. Her secret correspondence with foreign diplomats reveals sophisticated understanding of international politics, while her discussions with Russian officials demonstrate mastery of domestic policy details that will prove crucial during her eventual reign. The 7 Years' War provides Catherine with opportunities to observe Peter's catastrophic mismanagement of Russian interests, as you witness his bizarre admiration for Frederick the Great despite Prussia's status as Russia's enemy. Peter's decision to abandon Russian territorial gains and switch sides in the conflict demonstrates the incompetence that will eventually justify Catherine's coup in the minds of Russian patriots. Elizabeth's death in January 1762 brings Peter III to the throne and begins the final phase of Catherine's patient campaign. You watch as the new emperor immediately alienates the Orthodox Church through his attacks on religious traditions, horrifies the military through his Prussian sympathies, and disgusts the nobility through his childish behaviour and obvious contempt for Russian customs. The planning of Catherine's coup reveals her evolution into a master conspirator, as you observe her coordination with key military units, her cultivation of influential nobles, and her careful timing of the rebellion to coincide with Peter's absence from the capital. Her ability to maintain secrecy while organising such a complex operation demonstrates political skills that will serve her well during nearly 4 decades of absolute rule. The events of June 28, 1762 showcase Catherine's remarkable combination of courage and calculation, as you witness her dramatic appearance before the Izmailovsky Guards in a borrowed uniform, her passionate appeal to Russian patriotism, and her triumphant march to the Winter Palace as soldiers and nobles rally to her banner. The transformation from foreign princess to Russian empress occurs in a single day, but represents the culmination of 17 years of careful preparation. Peter III's mysterious death shortly after his abdication removes the final obstacle to Catherine's consolidation of power, though you notice how she maintains plausible deniability regarding his demise while ensuring that no potential restoration movement can rally around a living ex-emperor. Her immediate assumption of absolute authority demonstrates confidence born of long preparation and careful planning. Historians still argue whether Catherine's coup represented legitimate response to Peter III's competence or opportunistic seizure of power by an ambitious foreigner. Contemporary evidence suggests that Russian elite opinion genuinely supported her action, recognizing that Peter's continued rule threatened the empire's stability and international position. You observe how Catherine's early reign demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of Russian political culture, as she immediately reverses Peter's unpopular policies while presenting herself as restorer of traditional Russian values rather than foreign innovator. Her coronation ceremony in Moscow deliberately evokes ancient precedents while subtly introducing reforms that will modernize Russian governance. The publication of Catherine's Narkas, or instruction, reveals her attempt to codify Enlightenment principles within Russian legal framework. You examine her careful balance between progressive ideals and conservative realities, noting how she advocates for legal reforms while avoiding direct challenges to serfdom and autocracy that might threaten her political base. Catherine's territorial expansion through wars with the Ottoman Empire and the annexation of Crimea demonstrates how she channels Russian imperial ambitions toward traditionally acceptable targets while avoiding conflicts that might drain resources needed for domestic reforms. Her military successes provide legitimacy for a foreign-born ruler while advancing Russian strategic interests. The management of Pugachev's rebellion tests Catherine's political skills under extreme pressure, as you witness her response to the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Her combination of military force with political reform demonstrates understanding that successful governance requires both strength and flexibility, coercion and accommodation. Catherine's famous lovers become part of her political system rather than mere personal indulgences, as you observe how figures like Gregory Orlov, Grigory Potemkin, and others serve as advisors, administrators, and military commanders while providing companionship and emotional support. Her ability to maintain personal relationships while advancing state interests demonstrates the integration of private and public life that characterizes absolute monarchy. You realize that Catherine the Great represents the queen consort as revolutionary, someone who used traditional feminine roles to conceal radical political ambitions until the moment came to strike. Her transformation from German princess to Russian empress demonstrates how intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles when combined with perfect timing and ruthless execution. Her reign would prove that power seized through conspiracy could be legitimized through effective governance and territorial expansion. You glide through the marble halls of Versailles, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections on powdered faces, and the rustle of silk masks, the sound of sharpening guillotines in distant Paris streets. Marie Antoinette adjusts her elaborate headdress in a mirror that will soon reflect the flames of revolution. But you discover that beneath the infamous reputation for frivolity lies a woman whose political maneuvering was far more sophisticated than history often acknowledges. The 14-year-old archduchess who arrived from Vienna in 1770 brought more than just Habsburg marriage alliance to Versailles. She carried the weight of her mother's ambitions and the burden of serving as Austria's permanent ambassador to the French court. You observe young Marie Antoinette's initial struggles with French court etiquette, her homesickness for Austrian customs, and her gradual recognition that survival at Versailles requires mastering political skills that no convent education had taught her. The delayed consummation of her marriage to the future Louis XVI creates both vulnerability and opportunity. As you witness how court gossips transform private embarrassment into public scandal, while Marie Antoinette learns to navigate the treacherous currents of palace intrigue. Her apparent frivolity during these early years masks careful observation of French political dynamics and strategic cultivation of relationships that will serve her later purposes. You discover that Marie Antoinette's infamous spending on fashion and entertainment serves multiple political functions beyond mere personal pleasure. Her patronage of French silk manufacturers and furniture makers demonstrates royal support for domestic industry, while her elaborate court ceremonies maintain the theatrical display of royal magnificence that legitimizes Bourbon authority. Her gambling losses, though genuine, also facilitate informal negotiations with court nobles who might otherwise lack access to royal favour. The birth of her children transforms Marie Antoinette from decorative consort into protective mother, whose political actions increasingly focus on securing her offspring's inheritance. You observe how maternal anxiety drives her involvement in policy decisions, foreign negotiations, and financial arrangements that appear to serve Austrian interests but actually protect her children's future claims to French territories and revenues. Marie Antoinette's correspondence with her brother Emperor Joseph II reveals sophisticated understanding of European diplomatic balance. As you read her analysis of French foreign policy, her warnings about British naval power, and her recommendations for Austrian strategy during the American Revolutionary War. Her letters demonstrate political acumen that contradicts popular images of empty-headed queen obsessed only with partisan fashion. The diamond necklace affair of 1785 showcases both Marie Antoinette's political vulnerability and her remarkable ability to survive scandal through careful crisis management. You witness her shock at discovering that her reputation has been exploited by criminals, her methodical efforts to clear her name through legal proceedings, and her recognition that public opinion has become a political force that even absolute monarchs must consider. You notice how Marie Antoinette's Austrian connections become simultaneously her greatest asset and her most dangerous liability as revolutionary tensions mount. Her access to Habsburg intelligence networks provides valuable information about European developments, but her family loyalties also expose her to charges of treason when France and Austria become enemies during the Revolutionary Wars. The early phases of the French Revolution reveal Marie Antoinette's evolution from reluctant political participant into determined counter-revolutionary strategist. You observe her initial hopes that constitutional monarchy might preserve royal authority while satisfying popular demands, followed by her growing conviction that only foreign intervention can restore traditional order and protect her family's safety. The royal family's attempted flight to Varennes in June 1791 demonstrates both Marie Antoinette's courage and her miscalculation of revolutionary dynamics. You travel alongside the disguised royal family as they flee Paris, noting how the Queen's insistence on maintaining certain comforts slows their progress, while her correspondence with Austrian commanders provides revolutionaries with evidence of treasonous foreign collaboration. Marie Antoinette's secret negotiations with moderate revolutionary leaders reveal her sophisticated understanding of factional politics within the new regime. You observe her attempts to work with constitutional monarchists like Mirabeau and Barnave, recognizing that survival requires adapting to changed circumstances while working to protect essential royal prerogatives and family interests. The Queen's relationship with Count Axel von Fersen adds personal dimension to her political activities. As you witness how romantic attachment and political alliance interweave in ways that serve both emotional needs and strategic purposes, Fersen's position as Swedish diplomat provides cover for communications with foreign courts, while his devotion to Marie Antoinette ensures absolute loyalty during increasingly dangerous circumstances. You discover that Marie Antoinette's apparent political passivity during the revolution's radical phase actually masks intensive behind-the-scenes activity coordinating with émigré nobles, foreign courts, and counter-revolutionary movements within France. Her encoded correspondence reveals detailed knowledge of military preparations, financial arrangements, and strategic planning that contradicts images of helpless victim swept along by historical forces. The storming of the Tuileries Palace in August 1792 forces Marie Antoinette to confront the complete collapse of royal authority. But you observe how she maintains dignity and political focus even while facing immediate physical danger. Her calm behavior during the family's imprisonment demonstrates personal courage, while her continued correspondence with supporters shows persistent hope for restoration or escape. Historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette's political activities during the Revolution represented legitimate attempts to preserve constitutional order or treasonous collaboration with foreign enemies. Evidence suggests that her motivations combine genuine concern for French stability with natural desire to protect her family and preserve their ancestral rights. You notice how Marie Antoinette's trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal transforms her from political actor into symbolic victim, as prosecutors focus more on her alleged moral corruption than her actual political activities. Her dignified responses to accusations reveal intelligence and courage that contradict revolutionary propaganda depicting her as frivolous and incompetent. The Queen's final letters reveal sophisticated understanding of her historical situation. As you read her analysis of revolutionary dynamics, her predictions about future political developments, and her instructions for her children's education and moral development, her testament demonstrates political wisdom gained through bitter experience with the costs of ideological extremism and popular violence. Marie Antoinette's execution in October 1793 eliminates not just a person, but a symbol, as you witness how her death represents the revolution's complete rejection of traditional monarchy and aristocratic privilege. Yet her final words and dignified behaviour during execution also provide counter-revolutionary movements with powerful martyrdom narrative that will influence European politics for decades. The posthumous reputation of Marie Antoinette demonstrates how political figures can be transformed by historical memory, as you observe how her image evolves from hated symbol of aristocratic excess to tragic victim of revolutionary violence. This transformation reflects changing attitudes toward monarchy, femininity, and political violence, rather than new evidence about her actual character or activities. You realise that Marie Antoinette represents the queen consort as political victim, someone whose foreign birth, cultural differences, and gender made her vulnerable to attack when traditional order collapsed. Yet beneath the victimization lies evidence of sophisticated political intelligence, genuine concern for her adopted country's welfare, and remarkable personal courage under extreme pressure. Her story demonstrates how even the most privileged women could become casualties when historical forces beyond individual control reshape entire civilizations. The echoes of her carriage wheels on cobblestones fade into the distance, but you sense that her legacy extends far beyond the tragic end that defines popular memory. In the political manoeuvring, the maternal devotion, and the dignified resistance to revolutionary extremism, you glimpse a complex figure whose true story remains partially hidden beneath centuries of myth and propaganda. You drift through the shadowed corridors of the Ottoman imperial palace, where the scent of rosewater mingles with whispered plots, and discover a world where mothers of princes wield power that rivals sultans while remaining forever hidden behind silken veils. The harem, which Western imagination often reduces to exotic fantasy, reveals itself as the most sophisticated political institution in the Islamic world where intelligence, patience, and strategic alliances determine who will rule the greatest empire of its age. The sound of fountain water masks conversations that reshape empires, as you observe women whose official powerlessness conceals influence that extends from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. These are not the passive concubines of European imagination, but political operatives whose mastery of palace intrigue often exceeds that of the grand viziers and military commanders who officially govern the Ottoman state. You enter the world of the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother who stands at the apex of this feminine hierarchy. Her apartments overlook the Golden Horn, but her attention focuses on intelligence reports from across 3 continents. Through networks of former palace women now married to provincial governors, through trusted eunuchs managing imperial estates, through daughters married into noble families, she maintains awareness of political developments that sometimes exceed the Sultan's own knowledge. The institution of Dev Shirmeh, the collection of Christian boys for conversion and elite training, creates unexpected connections between the harem and the highest levels of imperial administration. You discover how palace women maintain relationships with these recruited officials, creating bonds of loyalty that transcend ethnic and religious boundaries. A Circassian concubine might find herself advising policies that affect her people's homeland, while a Georgian princess could influence appointments that determine her region's governance. The rise of Roxolana, who became the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, transforms the entire structure of Ottoman royal succession. You witness her unprecedented elevation from concubine to Haseki Sultan, breaking centuries of tradition that prohibited sultans from marriage after assuming the throne. Her influence over imperial policy, her correspondence with foreign rulers, and her architectural patronage demonstrate how individual ambition could reshape even the most rigid institutional frameworks. You observe the complex dynamics of succession politics within the harem, where mothers compete not just for their sons' advancement, but for the survival of their entire households. The Ottoman practice of fratricide, the execution of unsuccessful claimants to prevent civil war, means that palace women are literally fighting for their children's lives when they maneuver for imperial favour and political support. The architectural layout of the harem itself reflects its political function, as you explore courtyards and chambers designed to facilitate both privacy and surveillance. The strategic positioning of apartments, the carefully controlled access routes, and the elaborate protocols governing movement and communication create a physical environment where information flows according to her hierarchical relationships and political alliances. Education within the harem reveals another dimension of its political significance, as you discover schools where young women learn languages, literature, music, and the arts of conversation that will make them valuable diplomatic assets. These palace women often become more cosmopolitan and intellectually sophisticated than their male counterparts, their education deliberately designed to enhance their usefulness in negotiations and cultural exchanges. The economic power controlled by harem women often surprises Western observers, as you examine records showing vast estates, commercial investments, and charitable foundations managed by palace women. The Valid Sultan's personal wealth frequently exceeds that of European monarchs, while her charitable activities create networks of obligation and gratitude throughout the empire's territories. You witness the harem's role in Ottoman diplomacy through the marriages of imperial daughters and sisters to provincial governors, foreign allies, and powerful nobles. These unions create kinship networks that serve imperial interests while providing the women involved with political influence in their new homes. A sultan's daughter married to the governor of Egypt becomes an unofficial ambassador for imperial policy, while protecting her own interests and those of her children. The institution of the Kira, Jewish women who served as intermediaries between the harem and the outside world, reveals the sophisticated commercial and political connections maintained by palace women. Through these agents, harem residents engage in international trade, diplomatic correspondence, and intelligence gathering that supplements official governmental activities. Their commercial success often provides them with independent resources that enhance their political influence. Religious patronage offers another avenue for harem political influence. As you observe palace women founding mosques, schools, hospitals, and other institutions throughout the empire, these projects serve genuine charitable purposes while creating visible monuments to their patrons' piety and generosity. The public gratitude generated by such benefactions translates into political support that can prove crucial during succession crises or policy disputes. The Sultanate of Women period during the late 16th and early 17th centuries demonstrates the harem's potential for direct political control, as you witness a succession of powerful mothers and wives effectively ruling the empire during the reigns of weak or incompetent sultans. Figures like Nurbanu Sultan, Safiye Sultan, and Kösem Sultan exercise authority that extends far beyond traditional feminine roles into military appointments, financial policy, and diplomatic negotiations. Historians still argue whether the political prominence of harem women during this period represented corruption of traditional Ottoman institutions or natural adaptation to changing imperial circumstances. The evidence suggests that female political participation increased when external pressures and internal challenges required maximum utilization of available talent regardless of gender restrictions. You notice how the harem's political influence operates through indirect channels that make it difficult for contemporary observers and modern historians to trace precise mechanisms of power. Unlike European queens whose authority derives from legal status and public ceremony, Ottoman palace women exercise influence through personal relationships, economic resources, and informal networks that leave fewer documentary traces. The training of eunuchs reveals another aspect of harem political organization. As you observe how these intermediary figures are carefully selected and educated to serve as reliable agents in the complex negotiations between feminine political power and masculine governmental authority. Their unique position outside normal gender categories allows them to move between harem and divan while maintaining loyalty to their palace patrons. The decline of harem political influence during the 18th and 19th centuries reflects broader changes in Ottoman imperial structure, as European military pressure and internal reform movements gradually reduced the effectiveness of traditional palace politics. Yet even during periods of apparent decline, you observe individual women maintaining significant influence through strategic marriages, commercial activities, and religious patronage. The physical destruction of much of the old palace complex during the 19th century eliminates not just buildings, but entire networks of relationships and institutional memory that had sustained feminine political participation for centuries. The modernization efforts of sultans like Mahmud II and Abdulmecid deliberately target traditional power centers that might resist imperial reform, including the political networks centered in the harem. You realize that the Ottoman harem represents the ultimate expression of hidden feminine power, a political institution that operated parallel to official governmental structures while maintaining the appearance of domestic seclusion. These women ruled through influence rather than authority, through relationships rather than titles, through patience rather than force. Their story demonstrates how cultural restrictions on female political participation could be circumvented by those intelligent enough to work within traditional systems while gradually reshaping them to serve their purposes. You step into the shadowed galleries of the Louvre during the tumultuous years of the early 17th century, where the scent of incense from daily masses mingles with the metallic tang of political intrigue, and discover Marie de Medici orchestrating French foreign policy from behind a facade of maternal devotion and religious piety. The widow of Henri IV moves through these corridors with the bearing of someone who has learned to transform grief into power, regency into empire building. The assassination of Henri IV in 1610 transforms Marie from decorative Italian consort into the most powerful woman in Europe overnight, as you witness her immediate assumption of the regency for 9-year-old Louis XIII, her hands, still trembling from the shock of her husband's murder, sign documents that will determine France's role in the great European conflicts brewing across the continent. The blood on Parisian streets is barely dread when she's already calculating how to preserve French interests against the Habsburg encirclement that threatens to strangle her adopted homeland. You observe Marie's early struggles with the French nobility, who view her Florentine origins with suspicion that borders on xenophobia. The same aristocrats who had grudgingly accepted her as Henri's wife now question her fitness to govern France, their doubts amplified by her thick Italian accent and her apparent preference for Italian advisors. Yet you notice how she transforms these perceived weaknesses into strategic advantages, using her foreign connections to gather intelligence and her outsider status to mediate between competing French factions. The complexity of Marie's position becomes apparent as you examine her diplomatic correspondence, where maternal concern for her son's welfare interweaves with sophisticated analysis of European power balance. Her letters to the Pope reveal a woman using religious devotion as diplomatic currency, while her communications with Spanish ambassadors demonstrate her understanding that France must maintain peaceful relations with Habsburg territories despite fundamental conflicts of interest. Marie's relationship with her son, Louis XIII, provides the central drama of her regency. as you witness the gradual tension between maternal protection and royal independence. Her attempts to control the young king's education, his marriage negotiations, and his early policy decisions reflect genuine concern for his welfare combined with the reluctance to surrender the power that regency has provided. The psychological dynamics between protective mother and assertive son mirror the broader political struggle between traditional noble privilege and emerging royal absolutism. You discover that Marie's patronage of arts and architecture serves political purposes that extend far beyond personal taste or cultural prestige. The construction of the Luxembourg Palace represents not just architectural magnificence, but a statement about Medici resources and French royal stability. Her commissioning of Rubens' famous cycle depicting her own life creates visual propaganda that legitimizes her regency while celebrating Franco-Italian alliance and female political authority. The marriage negotiations for Louis XIII reveal Marie's sophisticated understanding of European diplomatic chess. As you observe her maneuvering between potential alliances that could reshape continental politics, her preference for Spanish matches reflects both her Catholic convictions and her strategic assessment that Habsburg friendship offers the best protection for French interests. Yet her willingness to consider Protestant alternatives demonstrates pragmatic flexibility when religious principle conflicts with political necessity. Marie's management of French finances during the Regency showcases her merchant family's understanding of state economics. As you examine her efforts to reduce the massive debts inherited from Henri IV's reign, while funding the military preparations necessary for France's emerging role as European hegemon, her negotiations with Italian bankers, her reforms of tax collection, and her careful management of royal expenditures demonstrate administrative competence that contradicts contemporary criticism of her supposed extravagance. The Estates General of 1614 provides Marie with an opportunity to demonstrate her political skills before a national audience, as you witness her careful orchestration of proceedings that formally ratify her regency, while avoiding commitments that might limit royal authority. Her speeches to the assembled representatives reveal a woman who has mastered the rhetoric of French monarchy while maintaining the substance of her own political agenda. You observe how Marie's religious policies balance genuine Catholic conviction with the practical needs of governing a religiously divided kingdom. Her support for the Counter-Reformation, her patronage of Jesuit education, and her devotion to the Virgin Mary serve both spiritual needs and political purposes by demonstrating royal commitment to Catholic orthodoxy. Yet her careful protection of Huguenot rights under the Edict of Nantes shows understanding that religious persecution could destabilize the realm. The emergence of Cardinal Richelieu as Marie's protégé and eventual rival creates one of history's most complex political relationships, as you watch the widow regent mentor the man who will eventually exile her from France. Her initial recognition of Richelieu's abilities, her promotion of his career, and her gradual realization that his vision of royal authority threatens her own influence demonstrate both political insight and the inevitable limitations of patronage-based power. Marie's involvement in the negotiations leading to the Treaty of Loudun reveals her continued influence over French foreign policy even as Louis XIII assumes greater personal control of governance. You witness her behind-the-scenes efforts to moderate her son's military ambitions, while protecting the diplomatic relationships she has carefully cultivated during her regency years. The Day of the Dupes in 1630 represents the final confrontation between Marie's vision of shared monarchy and Richelieu's programme of royal absolutism, as you observe the dramatic palace intrigue that forces Louis XIII to choose between his mother and his minister. Marie's confidence that maternal authority would triumph over ministerial advice demonstrates both her strength and her ultimate miscalculation of how completely French political culture was changing. Historians still argue whether Marie's political activities represented enlightened female governance or dangerous foreign interference in French affairs. Contemporary evidence suggests that her policies generally served French interests while advancing her own family's position, a combination that characterized most successful early modern rulers regardless of gender. You notice how Marie's exile to the Spanish Netherlands transforms her from French political actor into European diplomatic figure, as she maintains correspondence with courts across the continent while plotting her return to influence. Her presence in Brussels creates an alternative centre of French political authority that complicates Richelieu's efforts to centralise governmental control under royal authority. The irony of Marie's final years becomes apparent as you observe how the foreign connections that had made her suspect in France now provide her with resources and influence that transcend national boundaries. Her position as Dowager Queen of France, combined with her Medici inheritance and her Habsburg connections, makes her a significant figure in European politics despite her exclusion from direct participation in French governance. Marie's death in Cologne in 1642 removes one of the last representatives of the older political order that had balanced royal authority against noble privilege and foreign influence. You witness how her funeral becomes an international event attended by representatives from across Catholic Europe, demonstrating the respect that her political skills had earned even among those who had opposed her policies. The posthumous reputation of Marie de Medici reflects the broader historical tension between national loyalty and dynastic loyalty that characterized early modern European politics. Her defenders emphasize her devotion to French interests and her successful preservation of royal authority during a crucial transitional period, while her critics focus on her Italian origins and her alleged preference for foreign advice over French counsel. You realise that Marie de Medici represents the Queen Consort as the international politician, someone who used traditional feminine roles to advance diplomatic agendas that transcended national boundaries while serving the interests of both her adopted homeland and her natal family. Her story demonstrates how the complex loyalties of royal marriage could create opportunities for sophisticated political manoeuvring by women who understood that effective governance in early modern Europe required balancing competing obligations and multiple identities. You step through the fog-shrouded corridors of Buckingham Palace, where the scent of Earl Grey mingles with whispered diplomatic secrets, and discover Queen Alexandra moving through the shadows of Edward VII's reign with the quiet determination of someone who understands that preventing wars requires more delicate work than winning them. Her Danish accent barely perceptible after decades in England, she glides between drawing rooms where crowned heads gather, her presence so familiar that statesmen forget she's memorizing their every word. The princess who arrived from Copenhagen in 1863 brought more than Nordic beauty to her marriage with the future Edward VII. She carried the complex loyalties of a Danish royal family caught between German expansion and Russian alliance. You observe young Alexandra's early recognition that her position as British princess would require careful navigation between competing family loyalties, as her father, King Christian IX's children, scattered across European thrones like pieces on a diplomatic chessboard. You witness Alexandra's gradual mastery of British court protocol, noting how she transforms her initial disadvantage as foreign princess into strategic advantage as European insider. Her sister Dagmar's marriage to the future Alexander III of Russia creates direct connection to the Romanov court, while her brother George's succession to the Greek throne provides British influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. These family networks become Alexandra's private diplomatic channels, operating parallel to official governmental communications. The complexity of Alexandra's position becomes apparent during the Schleswig-Holstein crisis, as you observe her struggle between British governmental policy and Danish family loyalty. Her homeland's defeat by Prussian forces creates personal anguish that she must carefully conceal while maintaining the appearance of supporting British neutrality. Yet her private correspondence reveals how she uses her position to gather intelligence about German military capabilities and political intentions. You discover that Alexandra's famous beauty serves political purposes beyond mere social advantage, as her presence at diplomatic receptions and state functions creates opportunities for informal negotiations that supplement formal treaty discussions. Foreign ambassadors compete for invitations to her drawing rooms, where conversations about music and fashion mask discussions of military alliances and commercial agreements. Alexandra's relationship with her mother-in-law Queen Victoria reveals the intergenerational tensions within British royal diplomacy, as you witness conflicts between Victorian caution and Edwardian engagement with European politics. Alexandra's advocacy for more active British involvement in continental affairs often conflicts with Victoria's preference for splendid isolation, creating family dynamics that mirror broader debates about Britain's international role. The death of Victoria in Mo I transforms Alexandra from Princess of Wales into Queen Consort at a moment when European politics are reaching critical instability. You observe her immediate assumption of enhanced diplomatic responsibilities as she begins hosting the expanded series of royal visits and international conferences that will characterize Edward VII's reign. Her fluency in German, French, and Russian makes her invaluable as interpreter during complex multilateral negotiations. You notice how Alexandra's deafness, result of childhood illness, becomes an unexpected diplomatic asset that allows her to claim misunderstanding when conversations become politically dangerous while actually hearing everything through lip-reading skills that she carefully conceals. Foreign diplomats often speak more freely in her presence, assuming that her hearing impairment limits her political usefulness. The Entente Cordiale negotiations of 1904 showcase Alexandra's behind-the-scenes diplomatic influence, as you observe her cultivation of relationships with French officials that help overcome decades of Anglo-French antagonism. Her charm offensive during state visits to Paris creates personal bonds that facilitate the formal treaty discussions, while her correspondence with French royal relatives provides unofficial channels for resolving sensitive issues. Alexandra's management of the complex family relationships among European royalty requires diplomatic skills that often exceed those of professional ambassadors. You witness her careful mediation between her brother-in-law, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and her nephew Tsar Nicholas II, recognizing that personal slights and family grievances can escalate into international crises when they occur among crowned heads. The Russo-Japanese War creates particular challenges for Alexandra's diplomatic position, as you observe her attempts to maintain British neutrality while supporting her Russian relatives against Japanese aggression. Her private correspondence with Tsarina Alexandra reveals the emotional toll of watching family members suffer military defeats while officially remaining neutral in British governmental policy. You discover that Alexandra's charitable activities, particularly her work with hospitals and nursing organisations, serve intelligence-gathering purposes that supplement official diplomatic reporting. Her visits to military facilities, her conversations with wounded soldiers, and her correspondence with medical personnel provide her with information about military capabilities and morale that proves valuable during international negotiations. The naval arms race between Britain and Germany creates opportunities for Alexandra to exercise her most sophisticated diplomatic skills, as you witness her attempts to moderate the militaristic enthusiasms of both her husband and her German relatives. Her advocacy for limitations on battleship construction reflects both genuine pacifist conviction and shrewd assessment that uncontrolled military competition increases the likelihood of accidental war. Alexandra's role in managing the crisis surrounding the Dogger Bank incident demonstrates her understanding of how minor diplomatic disputes can escalate into major international conflicts. You observe her private interventions with Russian officials, her coordination with British naval authorities, and her successful efforts to prevent what could have become a disastrous Anglo-Russian war over a misunderstood fishing fleet encounter. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911 reveal Alexandra's growing influence over British foreign policy, as you witness her participation in the complex negotiations that maintain the balance between French colonial ambitions and German demands for commercial access. Her understanding of both French and German perspectives, gained through family connections and personal relationships, makes her invaluable as unofficial mediator. Historians still argue whether Alexandra's diplomatic activities represented appropriate queenly involvement in foreign affairs or dangerous interference in governmental policy. The evidence suggests that her interventions generally supported official British positions, while providing additional channels for communication that proved particularly valuable during crisis situations. You notice how Alexandra's influence operates through personal relationships rather than institutional authority, making her diplomatic contributions difficult to trace in official records. Her effectiveness depends on the trust and affection she cultivates among European royalty, diplomats, and political leaders who value her discretion and appreciate her genuine concern for preventing armed conflict. The final years before World War I show Alexandra increasingly frustrated by her inability to prevent the alliance system from hardening into opposing camps, as you observe her desperate attempts to maintain family harmony among European royalty despite growing political antagonisms. Her correspondence reveals growing awareness that personal diplomacy has limitations when confronted with nationalist passions and military planning. The outbreak of war in 1914 represents the ultimate failure of Alexandra's pacifist diplomacy. Yet you witness how her network of relationships continues to provide valuable intelligence and occasional opportunities for peace negotiations even during active hostilities. Her position as enemy of her German relatives creates personal anguish while potentially offering channels for ending the conflict through negotiated settlement. Alexandra's wartime activities demonstrate her adaptation from preventive diplomacy to wartime leadership, as you observe her transformation of drawing room negotiations into hospital administration, charity organisation, and morale maintenance. Her visible dedication to war relief efforts helps maintain civilian support for military operations while providing cover for continued intelligence gathering and occasional peace feelers. You realise that Queen Alexandra represents the Queen Consort as secret diplomat, someone who used traditional feminine roles to advance sophisticated peacekeeping agendas that operated below the threshold of official governmental attention. Her story demonstrates how family relationships among European royalty could be mobilised to prevent conflicts or manage crises when formal diplomatic channels proved inadequate. Her legacy lies not in treaties signed or battles won, but in wars prevented and crises diffused through the patient cultivation of personal trust and mutual understanding across national boundaries. You enter the amber-lit chambers of the Alexander Palace, where the scent of holy oil mingles with the whispered prayers of mystics, and discover Alexandra Fyodorovna kneeling before icons in a desperate attempt to save both her son and her empire through divine intervention. The German princess who became Russia's last empress moves through these halls like a sleepwalker caught between two worlds, the rational enlightenment of her European upbringing, and the mystical orthodoxy she has embraced with the fervour of a convert seeking salvation. The shadows lengthen across Persian carpets as you observe Alexandra's transformation from the confident young woman who captured Nicholas II's heart into the haunted figure whose influence over imperial policy will help precipitate one of history's most catastrophic revolutions. Her hands tremble not from fear but from the desperate urgency of someone who believes that the fate of 300 years of Romanov rule depends on her ability to channel divine power through earthly intermediaries. You witness the birth of Tsarevich Alexei in No. 4, the long-awaited heir, whose haemophilia immediately transforms celebration into a closely guarded state secret. Alexandra's discovery of her son's condition creates the central obsession that will dominate her political activities for the remainder of her life. The bleeding episodes that could kill the future Tsar become Alexandra's private hell, driving her toward increasingly desperate searches for miraculous cures and supernatural protection. The isolation that haemophilia imposes on the imperial family serves Alexandra's temperamental preferences while creating dangerous political consequences. You observe how her need to protect Alexei from injury and publicity gradually separates the royal household from the broader Russian aristocracy, creating a court culture that operates according to mystical rather than political principles. The Empress, who should be cultivating noble loyalty instead, alienates potential supporters through her apparent withdrawal from social obligations. Grigory Rasputin's appearance at court in 1907 provides Alexandra with the spiritual advisor she desperately seeks. As you witness their first meeting, and her immediate recognition that this Siberian peasant possesses powers that medical science cannot explain. His apparent ability to stop Alexei's bleeding through prayer and hypnosis transforms him from court curiosity into imperial necessity, despite the obvious political dangers his presence creates. You discover that Alexandra's relationship with Rasputin extends far beyond her son's medical needs into comprehensive reliance on mystical guidance for political decisions. Her letters reveal how she consults the Starets about ministerial appointments, military strategy, and legislative proposals, treating his peasant intuitions as divine revelation. The woman who should be advising her husband about governance instead channels the advice of a man whose understanding of statecraft derives from village politics and religious ecstasy. The outbreak of World War I transforms Alexandra's mystical preoccupations into direct political interference. As you observe her assumption of quasi-governmental authority during Nicholas's absence at military headquarters, her letters to the Tsar reveal a woman convinced that divine providence has chosen her to save Russia from military defeat and revolutionary chaos through spiritual intervention and authoritarian governance. Alexandra's German birth becomes a devastating political liability during wartime, as you witness how public suspicion of her loyalty combines with resentment of Rasputin's influence to create a toxic narrative about foreign corruption of Russian imperial authority. The German woman and the peasant become symbols of everything wrong with Romanov rule. Their alleged conspiracy blamed for military defeats and domestic chaos beyond their actual responsibility. You observe Alexandra's increasing isolation from Russian reality as she retreats into a world of prayer, mysticism, and conspiracy theories that bear little relationship to the political and military crises facing the empire. Her correspondence reveals growing paranoia about enemies within the court, combined with absolute confidence that divine intervention will ultimately vindicate her policies and destroy Russia's enemies. The dismissal of capable ministers like Stolypin and their replacement with Rasputin's favourites demonstrates how Alexandra's mystical politics undermines effective governance during the empire's greatest crisis. You witness her active campaigning for incompetent appointees whose only qualification is the Staretzes' endorsement, creating a governmental system based on superstition rather than competence. Alexandra's resistance to political reform reflects both her German understanding of monarchical authority and her mystical conviction that constitutional limitations on imperial power violate divine will. You observe her arguments against the Duma's expanded authority, her opposition to ministerial responsibility, and her insistence that autocracy represent God's chosen form of government for Russia. The military disasters of 1915 and 1916 failed to shake Alexandra's confidence in mystical solutions to political problems, as you witness her increasing reliance on Rasputin's guidance despite mounting evidence of his corrupting influence on imperial policy. Her letters reveal a woman so convinced of her spiritual mission that she cannot recognize the political catastrophe her actions are creating. Rasputin's assassination in December 1916 removes Alexandra's primary spiritual advisor, but fails to restore her connection to political reality. You observe her reaction to the murder, grief for a lost friend combined with terror about her son's medical vulnerability, while remaining oblivious to the popular celebration that greets news of the Staretzes' death. The February Revolution of 1917 catches Alexandra completely unprepared. As you witness her shock at discovering that the mystical protection she believed surrounded the imperial family has proven illusory, her frantic telegrams to Nicholas reveal a woman whose understanding of revolutionary dynamics derives from prayer rather than political analysis. Alexandra's behaviour during the family's captivity demonstrates both personal dignity and continued detachment from political reality. You observe her maintenance of court protocols in prison, her insistence on imperial prerogatives despite obvious powerlessness, and her persistent belief that loyal forces will restore Romanov authority through divine intervention. Historians still argue whether Alexandra's influence over Nicholas II was sufficient to make her responsible for the policies that led to imperial collapse. Evidence suggests that while she reinforced his autocratic tendencies and supported disastrous ministerial appointments, the fundamental problems facing Russia in 1917 transcended individual responsibility. You notice how Alexandra's mystical Christianity, while providing personal comfort during crisis, creates a political worldview fundamentally incompatible with modern governance. Her belief that earthly authority derives from divine appointment makes compromise and constitutional limitation appear not just politically unwise, but spiritually heretical. The final months of Alexandra's life reveal a woman whose spiritual convictions remain unshaken despite overwhelming evidence of their political consequences. You witness her continued prayers for imperial restoration, her maintenance of religious observances in captivity, and her apparent acceptance of martyrdom as divinely ordained conclusion to her earthly mission. Alexandra's execution in July 1918 eliminates not just a person, but a symbol of mystical monarchy's complete incompatibility with modern political realities. Yet you observe how her death also creates a martyrdom narrative that will influence Russian political culture long after the Romanov dynasty's disappearance. The destruction of Alexandra's correspondence and personal effects represents attempts to erase evidence of how mystical politics had corrupted imperial governance. But surviving documents reveal the extent to which supernatural considerations had displaced rational policy analysis during Russia's final crisis under autocratic rule. You realize that Alexandra Fyodorovna represents the queen consort as mystical politician, someone whose genuine religious devotion and maternal desperation combine to create a political philosophy based on divine intervention rather than human agency. Her story demonstrates how personal crisis can drive individuals towards supernatural solutions that, however comforting personally, prove catastrophic when applied to governmental policy. Her tragedy lies not in malicious intent, but in the dangerous gap between spiritual conviction and political reality. You step through the corridors of Buckingham Palace in the modern era, where television cameras replace court painters and opinion polls have become more important than royal bloodlines, discovering how 20th century queens consort adapted their behind-the-scenes influence to constitutional democracy's transparent demands. The scent of fresh flowers mingles with printer's ink from newspapers that scrutinize every royal gesture, as you observe women who must exercise power while appearing to have none at all. The transformation begins with Queen Mary, whose Victorian upbringing meets 20th century publicity demands in ways that reshape the monarchy's relationship with democratic society. You witness her careful cultivation of public dignity during World War I, recognizing that royal survival depends not on divine right but on popular approval. Her visits to munitions factories and wounded soldiers represent more than charitable duty. They're calculated demonstrations of royal relevance during democracy's greatest crisis. You observe how Queen Mary's influence over George V operates through what historians call soft power, the ability to shape decisions through personal relationships and moral authority rather than formal command. Her correspondence reveals sophisticated understanding of how constitutional monarchy must balance traditional pageantry with modern accessibility, creating a royal image that satisfies both conservative supporters and democratic critics. The abdication crisis of 1936 showcases how Queen's consort must navigate between personal loyalty and institutional survival, as you witness Queen Mary's agonizing position during Edward VIII's determination to marry Wallis Simpson. Her private letters reveal the conflict between maternal instinct to support her son and political wisdom that recognizes the monarchy's vulnerability to scandal during periods of international tension. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, emerges as perhaps the most politically astute royal consort of the modern era. As you observe her transformation from shy duchess into the steel-spined symbol of British resistance during World War II, the Blitz provides her with opportunities to demonstrate royal courage while building the personal popularity that will sustain the monarchy through decades of social transformation. You discover the Queen Mother's influence during her husband's reign extends far beyond ceremonial functions into active participation in governmental decision-making. Her presence at weekly audiences with prime ministers, her correspondence with political leaders, and her behind-the-scenes intervention in sensitive policy dossiers demonstrate how constitutional monarchy can accommodate informal female or political participation. The challenge of maintaining royal influence within democratic frameworks requires increasingly sophisticated public relations management. As you observe how mid-century queens consort master the art of appearing apolitical while actually advancing specific policy agendas, their charitable patronages, their ceremonial appearances, and their carefully scripted public statements serve political purposes disguised as traditional female activities. Queen Elizabeth II's accession transforms the dynamics of royal marriage, as you witness Prince Philip's adaptation to the unprecedented role of consort to a reigning queen. His experience reveals the gender assumptions embedded in traditional monarchy, as he struggles to maintain masculine dignity while officially subordinated to his wife's constitutional authority. Their partnership demonstrates how changing social attitudes toward gender roles affect even the most traditional institutions. You notice how television transforms the possibilities and limitations of royal influence, as cameras bring queens consort into subjects' homes, while simultaneously constraining their ability to engage in private political manoeuvring. The medium that makes them more visible also makes them more vulnerable to criticism, requiring new forms of discretion and diplomatic skill. The evolution of royal marriages during the later 20th century reflects broader changes in women's social roles, as you observe how Princess Margaret, Princess Anne, and later Diana, Princess of Wales, navigate between traditional royal duties and modern expectations of female independence. Their struggles reveal the tensions between institutional requirements and personal autonomy that characterize women's experiences across society. Diana's transformation from shy kindergarten teacher into global humanitarian demonstrates how modern queens consort can transcend national boundaries to exercise international influence. You witness her evolution from decorative royal wife into independent political actor whose campaigns against landmines and AIDS stigma demonstrate soft power's potential for addressing global challenges. The media attention surrounding Diana's marriage and divorce reveals both the opportunities and dangers facing modern royal women. As you observe how celebrity culture transforms queens consort into entertainment figures whose personal lives become public property, her story demonstrates how traditional royal privacy becomes impossible in the age of tabloid journalism and global communication. You discover that contemporary queens consort must balance multiple and sometimes contradictory expectations, remaining politically neutral while supporting important causes, maintaining dignity while being accessible, preserving tradition while adapting to social change. Their success requires diplomatic skills that often exceed those demanded of elected politicians. The role of Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, demonstrates how modern royal consorts must overcome negative publicity through patient demonstration of competence and commitment. You observe her gradual transformation from controversial figure into respected working royal through strategic charity work, careful public appearances, and consistent support for her husband's initiatives. Modern queens consort operate within constitutional frameworks that officially limit their political role while providing numerous opportunities for informal influence. You witness how they use patronage of charitable organizations, participation in state ceremonies, and cultivation of relationships with political leaders to advance policy agendas that serve both royal interests and broader public welfare. The international dimensions of modern royal influence become apparent through state visits, diplomatic receptions, and cultural exchanges that strengthen bilateral relationships while advancing specific political and economic objectives. Queens consort serve as unofficial ambassadors whose personal charm and cultural knowledge can facilitate negotiations that formal diplomacy finds difficult to achieve. Historians still argue whether modern queens consort possess real political influence or merely provide decorative legitimacy for democratic governments that have outgrown monarchical authority. Evidence suggests that their influence varies dramatically based on individual personality, political circumstances, and their ability to adapt traditional roles to contemporary requirements. You observe how social media creates new opportunities and challenges for royal women, as platforms like Instagram and Twitter allow direct communication with subjects while also exposing them to immediate criticism and constant scrutiny. The democratic potential of social media conflicts with traditional royal mystique in ways that require careful management. The emphasis on environmental protection, mental health awareness, and international development that characterizes contemporary royal charitable work reflects both genuine personal commitment and shrewd recognition of issues that transcend partisan political divisions while addressing urgent social needs. You notice how modern queens consort must demonstrate their value to taxpayers who fund royal activities, requiring them to justify their positions through measurable achievements and visible public service rather than simply existing as symbols of national unity and historical continuity. The education and professional backgrounds of recent royal consort from commoners' daughters to international humanitarian workers, reflect changing social expectations about meritocracy and female achievement, while also demonstrating the monarchy's adaptation to democratic values. You realise that modern queens consort represent the ultimate evolution of hidden female power, as they exercise influence through soft power, moral authority, and strategic public service while operating within constitutional frameworks that officially deny them political role. Their story demonstrates how traditional institutions can adapt to democratic societies while preserving essential functions that elected governments cannot easily provide. Their influence may be less dramatic than their historical predecessors, but it remains significant in shaping public discourse, international relationships, and social policy within the constraints and opportunities of contemporary democratic governance. You drift through the twilight corridors of history, where the echoes of whispered commands and silent strategies still linger in the air, like incense from long extinguished candles. The shadows of these remarkable women stretch across centuries, their influence rippling through time in ways that shape the very foundations of the world you inhabit today. As darkness settles over the palaces and courts where they once moved like phantoms of power, you begin to understand the profound legacy of those who ruled from behind veils, screens, and thrones that bore other names. The patterns emerge as you trace their stories across cultures and centuries, revealing universal truths about power, influence, and the human capacity to transcend official limitations through intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking. Whether in the marble halls of Byzantium or the silk-draped chambers of the Forbidden City, whether in medieval castles or modern constitutional palaces, these women discovered that true authority often flows through channels that official histories rarely record. You witness how each generation of queens consort inherited the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Eleanor of Aquitaine's diplomatic networks evolved into Catherine de' Medici's correspondence remous, which transformed into Marie de' Medici's international alliances, which eventually became the soft power diplomacy of modern royal women. The tools changed, but the fundamental understanding remained constant. Influence requires relationship, patience, and the ability to see possibilities where others see only limitations. The cost of such power becomes apparent as you consider the personal sacrifices these women made in service of their political ambitions, the loneliness of maintaining facades while bedtime and true thoughts remained hidden, the constant vigilance required to navigate courts where a single misstep could mean death or exile, the anguish of choosing between maternal instincts and political necessity. These burdens shaped their characters and constrain their choices in ways that make their achievements all the more remarkable. You observe how their religious faith, whether genuine devotion or political calculation, provided both motivation and justification for their activities. The divine sanction that legitimized their queenship also offered protection for actions that might otherwise appear presumptuous or dangerous. Their piety became armor against criticism, while their charitable works created networks of obligation and gratitude that served political purposes long after the immediate beneficiaries were forgotten. The international dimensions of their influence reveal how marriage, kinship, and personal relationships created the first truly global political networks. Long before modern communications technology, these women maintained awareness of developments across continents through family connections, religious orders, and commercial relationships that transcended national boundaries. Their correspondence networks served as early warning systems for political crises and opportunities that official diplomacy often failed to anticipate. Do you remember how Theodora's transformation from actress to empress demonstrated that social mobility remained possible even in rigidly hierarchical societies for those clever enough to recognize and seize their opportunities? Her story echoes through the centuries in the rise of other remarkable women who refused to accept the limitations imposed by birth, circumstance, or gender expectations. The tragedy of figures like Alexandra Fyodorovna reminds you that intelligence and dedication cannot always overcome historical forces beyond individual control. Yet even their failures provide lessons about the dangers of substituting wishful thinking for realistic analysis. Their mistakes illuminate the boundaries of personal agency, while their successes demonstrate its remarkable potential when properly directed. You notice how the evolution of queen's consort reflects broader changes in society's understanding of gender, authority, and political legitimacy. The mystical monarchy that empowered medieval queens gave way to constitutional frameworks that required different strategies and skills. Yet the fundamental challenge remained constant: how to exercise meaningful influence while officially remaining subordinate to male authority. The architectural monuments they left behind, palaces, churches, hospitals, and schools, represent more than aesthetic achievements or charitable gestures. These buildings embody their vision of how power should be exercised and what purposes it should serve. The summer palace that Cixi rebuilt, the Luxembourg palace that Marie de Medici constructed, the hospitals that modern royal women patronize, all demonstrate how queens consort used physical structures to make their influence visible and permanent. Their patronage of arts and learning created cultural legacies that often outlasted their political achievements. The troubadour culture that Eleanor of Aquitaine nurtured, the Renaissance scholarship that Isabella of Castile supported, the Enlightenment ideas that Catherine the Great promoted, these intellectual movements shaped human consciousness in ways that transcended their immediate political contexts. Historians still argue whether these women advanced or hindered the cause of female equality, whether their success within traditional systems legitimized those systems or demonstrated their potential for transformation. Perhaps both interpretations contain elements of truth, reflecting the complex reality that progress often occurs through accommodation as much as confrontation. You realize that their stories offer timeless lessons about leadership, influence, and the patient cultivation of power in circumstances that might seem hopeless to less determined individuals. Their techniques, the strategic use of information, the careful building of alliances, the transformation of apparent weaknesses into hidden strengths, remain relevant in any context where official authority and real influence operate according to different rules. The modern queens consort you observed today demonstrate that even in democratic societies, there remains space for the kind of informal influence that these women perfected over centuries. The constitutional frameworks that officially constrain royal political participation create new challenges that require adaptation of traditional techniques rather than their abandonment. As the shadows deepen and the last light fades from ancient windows, you sense that the legacy of these remarkable women extends far beyond the specific achievements recorded in history books. They changed fundamental assumptions about what women could accomplish, what power looked like, and how influence operated in human societies. Their whispered commands still echo in the corridors of power. Their strategic thinking continues to influence political behavior, and their example provides inspiration for anyone who must work within restrictive systems while pursuing transformative goals. The queens behind the throne proved that visibility and authority are not synonymous, that patience can be more powerful than force, and that the most lasting influence often operates through channels that leave few traces in official records. Their stories remind you that true power lies not in commanding attention but in shaping outcomes, not in claiming credit but in achieving results, not in breaking barriers but in moving through them, with such skill that observers never realize how completely the landscape has been transformed. In the gathering darkness of this final moment, you understand that these women's greatest achievement was not any single political victory or dynastic success, but their collective demonstration that human potential cannot be contained by social expectations, legal limitations, or cultural assumptions. They proved that extraordinary individuals can transcend extraordinary circumstances through intelligence, determination, and the courage to pursue influence through whatever channels remain available. Their legacy whispers still in every corridor of power, every boardroom, every place where important decisions are made through relationships, persuasion, and the patient accumulation of trust and obligation. The queens behind the throne created a template for hidden influence that continues to shape how power operates in human societies. Their phantom presence a reminder that the most important rulers are often those whose names never appear on official documents, whose commands are never recorded by historians, yet whose influence shaped the destiny of nations and the course of human civilization. The candles flicker and die, the shadows claim their ancient domain, and you drift towards sleep carrying the whispered secrets of women who proved that true queens need not wear crowns to rule the world.